let's have a look at these skirts. And the first, actually I'm going to start with the other one, which is this one. I think, I should really start looking it up. I think this is a 30s pattern. Has any of you done it? Hello Nasima, how nice to see you. Have any of you actually done this pattern? I'd love to know. I found it, I think, on the Pattern Vault, which is a great resource. But the reason I love it, because it looks really complicated. But actually the top I've done a drafting tutorial for last year, and then the skirt is super easy. So I'm just gonna draw that here. Let me see how many pages I've got. So the top is really easy. I'm going to concentrate on the skirts, but I really wanted to draw the skirt for you as well, which is not that easy to draw. What it basically has is, God, I don't even know what it's supposed to be. I'm going to start again because that looks awful. This is basically the dart, and it becomes like a grown-on collar, and it's quite clever. And there is a tutorial on my Patreon if you want to. And it's got sort of quite square shoulders. It's got quite simple sleeves. I'm just going to sketch the top out quickly. Oh, hello Katie. Hello everybody who's just joined. I'm looking at 1930. I think it's like 1930s. You might know better. It might be 40s. But it's got lots of tiny buttons, so it's quite a simple, nice style. And then the one big feature is that it has this really nice, which I'm struggling to draw. There you go. It's got this really nice. Basically the dart becomes a pleat, and then it becomes a stand collar. Hello Dayi, thank you for joining. And then, as always, what I find interesting, and I'd love to hear where you struggle with that. If you look at vintage patterns, it looks super fitted, but they only got the darting up here, and you can in theory move both the waist dart and the bust dart into volume in one direction, but it's quite frowned upon in industry because it's quite clunky. So you normally always have two darts. To achieve a really fitted styles, you normally need to have some sort of shaping there. So I wonder if the actual pattern has some sort of darting, and this is just really nice illustration, or if it is actually one piece. If it is, I'd love to hear how you found the fit, because I would struggle with the fit. But then what this actually is, we've got a pleated, just the center front, and probably a third of the waist is pleated, and then it's got this sort of volume which comes out and then sort of drapes down. Oh, 1942, somebody found it already. Thank you so much for looking. So I was wrong with the 30s, it is 1940s. It has this, that's why I wasn't sure, because it has elements of both. But it's got all this volume, and then the rest of the skirt is quite simple. And it would make sense being 1942 as well, because it's sort of quite a nice statement drape, but it's quite, it doesn't use a lot of fabric. So it would make sense when you had rationing and all that stuff. And then I would imagine that the back is really simple. So the back just has a little short collar. It's got the shoulder pads as well. And then the belt. And I would imagine they always have darting at the back. And then I would imagine the back is just this darts. Just thinking about how to get in. If these are working buttons, and I would imagine they are, then underneath here, the middle pleat at the center front is actually open, and it has a facing. so it's faced like that. But oh yes, there you're right. There you just said it's amazing that women used to wear such wonderfully fitting clothes. They are, but then everybody would have learned how to dressmake, so you would have been able to take a pattern which probably hasn't got much markings and make it fit you. So this is the pattern, and I wanted to show you a contemporary one before I talk a bit more about fitting. So this one is Alexander McQueen this summer, and I think it's about £1,700. It's on Net-a-Porter. But can you see it's got a very similar detail. They've styled it differently, but it's the same method. So something comes out, and then depending what fabric you use, it can be really drapey. So this would probably be well, we would nowadays probably make it out of silk to make it this drapey, but I actually can imagine it in a really nice wool crepe. But it has to be that quality, or it could also be a satin backed crepe. So it has that would have a really nice weight to it, which would make a good drape, and that would give you a really drapey one. And the contemporary by comparison is done in a cotton fay. So that's a quite a weighty, really nicely structured cotton. I'm just trying to think how to compare it with. It's got quite a lot of weight, and it drapes really nicely. It's quite sculptural. But this is basically the same technique. And I'm going to show you, we got a live draft analysis on Patreon on Tuesday. I'm going to show you how to drape it yourself on the mannequin, because it's really easy. But the contemporary one by comparison is, again, this is a really deep neckline. It's got quite a high waistline. It's got princess seams. And here you can see this is fitted, but you can see that's your, in the seam, that's your waist dart, and that's your bust dart. While on this one, here, that's my bust dart being changed into volume, but I would love to know how I keep it that fitted here. But it's, the pattern piece basically will look different to contemporary pattern piece, because our pattern pieces look more like, I don't know what colors I'm using tonight. Our pattern pieces, I know I've got always an under bust dart. My pattern piece looks like this. I would imagine if they have that much fitting, it would curve more and it would look more like that. And then you have got your pleating up here, which becomes your shawl collar at the back. So if you look at vintage pattern, the blocks or it might look really different. But I'm glad you're liking it, everybody. So if I quickly go back to the contemporary one, I'll just keep an eye on the time. So this time, instead of lots of pleats, they've done tiny gathers. Then again, you got the volume, which comes out of the waist, and they photographed it, so it looks like that. And I've actually got a dress like that, so I'm gonna wear it on Tuesday and show you if I can find it. And then the difference is the vintage one. Oh, wrong, sorry. The vintage one has a plain back and just fitted side seams. So the only volume on this is this bit, which is basically just excess fabric, and the pleats at the front. So it's all 40s fashioning, not using too much fabric. So you got one really well placed detail, but the rest doesn't use a lot of fabric. Same with the top. While the contemporary one, you can see it then continues to have tiny gathers, so it's a really full skirt. I would imagine the whole skirt is probably something like the width of your fabric. So in centimeters, it's 150 centimeters. If you're American, inches, what is it? 3 feet? I never know. It's basically the width of a general fabric. And that all gets gathered in. So that has a lot more volume. But the principle is the same. You just take... Hi Nathaniel, the contemporary one, it's a cotton fay, which you also get as a wool silk. We've talked about it before because this is also a cotton fay, the Claire McCardle. There's a few suppliers who do like a beautiful wool silk fay. It's not too heavy, but it's got a really nice structure for draping, so it looks very sculptural. So it's quite densely woven, not too thick, but it drapes beautifully. I always think it looks very couture, even if it's a simple style like that. But then Alexander McQueen always has beautiful fabrics. So the details are the same, but it's just they've been placed in a different skirt part. But all it is, it's like a loop of fabric coming out. And then it just folds, and it all depends what piece of fabric you put it on. So if that's your skirt, like your basic skirt, you basically create a cut line, and then you can either add an oversized dart or you add just some extra volume. But it's easiest to drape, especially contemporary one. So I'm going to show you how to do that on the mannequin on Tuesday. But that's the first style. Are there any questions before I move on to the next one? Because I'm trying to look at 4 tonight. Would it be somebody just asked, would it be some kind of viscose cotton? No, so this one is the opposite. Oh, so it's such a precious fabric, but I don't actually own it. It's got a beautiful sheen. So it's, viscose I always think is really drapey. This is the opposite. It's very densely woven. If you ever can get a sample somewhere, go for it, because it's quite precious. Sorry, I'm just looking at my fabric stash. But it's the one fabric I don't own at all. I might have some samples. I have a look and then I show it to you on stories. And if it's quite hard cotton file to get, I would also think this would work really nice in a bark cloth. A bark cloth again is like a textured cotton. A viscose cotton, if you use a viscose cotton, it would look more like this. It would drape beautifully, I think, and I can see it in the viscose really nicely, just really drapey. It's basically the more of a viscose, silk, a drapey wool. Even I've got very similar style to that, made out of viscose wool, Prince of Wales suiting fabric, and that drapes really nicely. And anything more cotton or more structured silk, or even a linen will look more like that. So Faye has the sort of same beautiful, not a stiffness, but it has more body than the viscose. So, have you got any other questions about how to put? Actually, putting it together is quite simple, and it depends on the structure. And on here, on this one, the bodice would be fully lined, so we'll have a self-facing on this one, and then it probably be lined, and then the skirt is just all hidden. And then this one, I will imagine it's got a facing here, and then, as I said, there is a hidden seam probably in here, or a keyhole, so you can get in and out. Alternatively, you could make all these buttons purely ornamental and put in a side seam with a zip, because if you have it stitched shut, it won't move, so that'd be quite nice. But otherwise the construction is actually quite easy, and you can basically, if you're very clever, you can even make these as pockets, but I prefer them just as a detail. I'm going to chat a bit more about it when I have mannequin. I share some pictures of it afterwards on here as well. Let's have a look at the other one, which is, there's basically lots of versions like this. This is a 1930s version. I'm 90% sure this is 30s, not 40s in this case. Although I think it looks very 80s. We talked about it before with the neckline. Actually in the Vintage Pattern Masterclass, because it's got a really nice yoke. But actually Nasima, this one is for you, because you recently showed me this one, which is a Brandon Maxwell Resort. And we both loved the KP sleeve on that. But I also actually loved the skirt. And the reason why I chose both of them, they're not that, the other ones are very, very similar. These are a bit more different, but they both use a panel skirt. So I wanted to talk about, glad you love it, Nasima. It's basically panel skirts. And I do promise you my handwriting normally is better, but I'm sort of, because of Instagram being portrait, I have to sort of lean over my table, so it's not the best handwriting, but it's normally nicer. And basically panel skirts, you can have a 2 panel, you can have a 4 panel, or you can have an 8 panel. And Natalie Bray has a really good section on it, but this for example is a 2 panel skirt. So this is, I think this is a half circle altogether. So each panel, if you have a look, I'm going to talk about materials in a second. I've got a YouTube tutorial on like a really basic panel skirt, which is kind of like a 10-minute draft, because you can basically 10-minute panel skirt. And what you do is you decide how many you want. Actually, you can have 6 as well if you want to. And then for the most basic one, you just make it like this. And you divide your waist by how many panels you want. And then each panel is, for example, 1/8. And then you can change it. The wider you make your panel, the bigger you comes your skirt. But I like, so this one is actually nearly identical. So this is a 4 panel skirt, but then each panel is a quarter, I think. Yeah. So each panel is a quarter, and you can either, so it's actually, it might be a full skirt. And the reason I'm thinking it is because so I'm just trying to work out, because it's 45-degree angle. No, in that case, sorry, I was wrong. It's not a quarter. It's each panel is half a quarter, which would then make your front a quarter and your back a quarter. And that's how you get this beautiful, so that's your center front, and you get the beautiful bias cut, basically. I apologize. And that's how you actually work stuff out, because sometimes with that skirt it would be quite hard. Is a half circle, is a 3/4 circle. But if you see anything as stripe fabric, then straight away you can see that seam is on the bias and that seam is on the bias. And if you have a quarter circle, you can have a bias on one side, but not, well, you can sort of have it, but it's probably smaller. You will be able to work it out exactly. But what I think they have done to get a nicer shape, they've basically shaped the seam up here. So like the darting, so the top is curved so it fits better around you. Because if you have a normal straight panel skirt, it won't be fitted. But this, I think if you curve it slightly, it might just be a centimeter off each side. It basically fits better and will give you a nicer fit. So it's a 1930s image. It is just an eighth of a circle. Actually, I'm still 100% sure. I'm not doubting myself, so I'm quickly going to draw it out. If it is, so I'm following the grids on my, if it's a quarter, yes, sorry, I was right to begin with, and then, because it was half of that. But actually, basically, if you make it an eighth, if you make it an eighth, these angles will be like this. If you make it a quarter, it will be like this. So it's up to you. Now, talking of materials, the 1930s one is cotton or linen, but it will actually look beautiful in the viscose as well. So it's really drapey. But I wanted to have a look in. Now I've confused you all with the stripe and the bias. I wanted to have a look at the contemporary one because that becomes really exciting. And, okay, so the contemporary one actually has lots of panels. Can you see? So I think this is actually, you got two options of drafting it, and I've actually got, yes, Yolanda, this one is a four panels, so there's two front panels and two back panels, and as I said, with my really confusing drawing, each panel is either a quarter circle, which make it full, which make it a full circle, so in that case the full skirt will be like that, but it's cut into four. And then they slightly shaped it, so it's better fitted than a circle skirt. So you could make it like that, which would then, which I think it is. I apologize, this was like the, because I haven't looked at the skirt on this one before. So, but I do this in real life. I draw it out because it really helps you save on paper. Especially if you have a sketch of somebody else and you're 100% sure you haven't got a clear photo. So here you can see it is a full circle skirt. Each panel is a quarter circle, but you can add the shaping so it fits better, and you can really play around with the stripe. So you always get the straight stripe in the middle, and the seams, they're running a bias. So it's quite difficult, not difficult to stitch, but it's more difficult to stitch when it's straight, but you just have to match. And what you can even do is that you add a tape to stabilize it a bit, a bias binding. And somebody just asked, is it to be worn with a petticoat? I actually don't think, well, this would have had a slip underneath probably, because people wore proper undergarments. But I think for this style, because it is quite, because it's day there might, I don't think it's a fully fluffy petticoat. What do you think, people? Do you think it's worn with a petticoat, this one? I would imagine more like a slip petticoat. And Yolanda is quite right as well, because you can have different opposites and stuff. Yes, and it is difficult to join. I agree. Try around with it. Depends on the fabric. And you think it has got a petticoat? Yes. I think yes. I don't think it's got a full-on. It definitely has whatever. Either a separate slip or a lining a lot of the time. Oh, it might have a ruffle just at the bottom edge. We're getting exciting here. Yes, so what Astrid means is you can get these sort of quite simple slips, which then just have a ruffle at the bottom, which just gives you a bit of body. The other option as well is what I've seen that people have actually put in, but that's more contemporary. You can actually put like a fisherman nylon string in, and that gives it lots of body, but I'm not a fan of that. There's lots of options. But yes, it's up to you. You can put a petticoat underneath. If you make it in a linen, you probably don't have to, but if you make it more in a viscose, I always think it looks better if you either line it or you wear a separate petticoat or slip. So I'm going to look at one more, which is the same technique but a bit more glamorous maybe. This is Brandon Maxwell. As I said, it's resort, and Nasima will be able to tell us, but I think it is this season. Yes, and Alberolo horsehair would work as well. Yes, that would give it a bit of texture. And even if you had just a facing at the bottom of your skirt and you put in a strip of tailoring fabric, that would work as well. Lots of good ideas. There you go. Like you're doing part of analysis. That's what I love, that you always have lots of knowledge. So this one, actually I was talking to Seema because that's very similar to that. It's a bit different, but it's very now at the moment. I found a different one today by Jill Sander as well. Jill Sander has done exactly this, but slightly differently styled for this season. I think it's on Matches at the moment, or Mr. Net-a-Porter as well. But the skirt is really interesting. It's got 1, 2, 3 panels on each side. So this is actually a 12 panel skirt. So what it basically enables you, so it's got a center front seam, and then it's got 2 more seams, and that enables you to create really controlled volume. So what I love about it, I think it's pretty, actually it's more like this. So the top of it is pretty fitted, not very fitted, but can you see, sort of up to, I'm going to draw in black again, up to maybe just above the hip. It's actually pretty fitted, and then because we've got all these panels, you can start adding lots of volume, which then gives you a sort of movement. So can you see at the bottom, I think there is a full circle skirt. But each panel, I think it could be a 12 panel skirt, or it could be a trumpet skirt. And if you're my patron, there is a trumpet skirt tutorial from last, maybe October. But basically if it's panels, so panels are easier to make. So if you wanted to do 12 panels, I would actually you could just use them from your measurements, and you could literally just draw panels. But what I would do is I would keep them fitted to the hip, and then you would change the angle. So you can just do it from your measurements. So you divide your waist by 12, you divide your hip by 12, but add some ease to your hip. So I would say that that's at least 10 centimeters overall. So 4 inches ease, but it's still pretty fitted. And then underneath the hip, it just goes out. And I think it's actually more than a circle skirt. because can you see how it moves in and out, and she's got all this volume. So I think it's one of those where I would make a little, when I make clothes for myself, I don't do half scales because I think you need to see it on yourself. But just to see how much volume you need, I would make a little half scale, trowel, and just work out how much volume you need to add. So if it was a full skirt circle and we had 12 panels, which would mean six. So I need to divide each of them into 6, which is where all our maths come in. And if you hate maths, which is probably the easiest, if you're good at maths, you can just use calculators. If you want a full circle, each of your panels would be 1/3 of a quarter, which is really complicated. And so what you would do is you just you could actually draw on a circle skirt and then work it out from there, but I would just experiment because I think it's more than a circle. So I would start with making each panel this, which is actually 1/8 of a circle, so that would make more than a circle, but that's quite easy to draw because it's basically half of a quarter circle. Or if you wanted to go really extreme, I think you could easily make each panel like this. So make it a full quarter circle, which means times 12. Yes, 1/3 of 1/4. That's why it becomes quite mad, because that's a quarter here and each one is into 3 panels because it's 12 altogether. I think quite often I would work it out like that, so I roughly know how wide I want this to be, but then I would just draw it on. I would sort of I think you can get overly focused on saying, oh, it needs to be exactly 1/12 of a circle, rather than actually thinking what looks good. Because if you made each one a quarter, so this is bigger, which is double, but if you made each one a quarter, your whole circle would actually be 3 circle skirts. So that might be too much. So I would go with 1/8 and try it out. But the reason I think this works really well is you could either make it in a really nice, sometimes you get a cotton with a nice sheen. Not a chintz, but a dress, like a shirting cotton with lots of structure, like maybe a cotton batiste, do you think? Basically something which really holds its structure. One day I will look at fabrics before I started so I can show you. Basically it will look beautiful in a linen cotton mix. In a linen or cotton, something with sheen. I think this could either be a silk cotton, a silk or cotton. You can look it up properly if it's in their shop. It will tell you exactly what it is. But you want something with quite a lot of structure, because what I love about it, that the skirt, with a circle skirt, is just a circle skirt. This has the same volume, but because of the seams, it seems to sort of fold in and out. It becomes nearly pleated and it looks quite geometric. So that's what I find is quite beautiful about it. It's cut on the straight, so it's easy to stitch up here and then slightly trickier to stitch down there. And it's a tiny check. So, but you know, you could do it in like a day wear dress, or you could do it it would be beautiful in a silk as well. If you did it in a silk with quarter circles, your whole skirt, when you wear it, would sort of just like swish around. It'd be beautiful. It would have lots of volume and it would just move around your ankles. But in a stiffer fabric with more structure, it would really nicely fold in and out. So I'm just still looking at fabrics, but I haven't got any. And when it comes to construction, this has actually got an invisible button stand, but so that probably again has, I wouldn't be surprised, but it might have the button stand is actually fake here, or otherwise it's exactly the same, but it has like a hidden front panel. And yeah, Esther, it's like, you're right, in a lightweight suiting, it'd be beautiful. In a lightweight suiting, it would look like the contemporary Dior, but they used a really nice suiting fabric, and it would drape a bit, it would drape more in a lightweight suiting, but it would make an amazing day wear dress or skirt. I would, with something like that, I would put a side seam in on the left hand side, and just an invisible zip in one of the seams, because I don't think you need any details. And you can put pockets in, of course, and what you can use as well, you can just use one width as your pocket. So it's a function, you know, so your pocket is like this. So you put your hand in here, and then the pocket is just stitched into there. That'd be really nice. Or you could have your pocket slightly forward as well. So I wouldn't put my pocket in the side. I would put my pocket on that seam. I don't think she has a pocket, but this is where I put my pocket in, and I would anchor it into the seams, so it doesn't flap around. So it's nice and mounted. And then again, this you can make it with a underskirt lined, you could bind the seams inside, you could French hem the seams, or you could just overlock them. And then I think, I'm just looking at, I think they've done a facing on the hem, and what you do is you just cut the facing to match basically each panel, and then you probably have the seams. Or what you could do, if you feel quite confident, you could use bias binding as well, but you have to, if you're using bias binding for the first time, I wouldn't try it. But basically you can steam your bias binding to fit into a curve, depending how curved it is. If it's like this, I wouldn't, but if it's a gentle curve, you can basically steam your bias binding to act as a facing. But if in doubt, add a curved facing. And what you can do is that you alternate the seams. So your facing might have a seam slightly to the side, so it's not too bulky. But yes, so these are my two vintage skirts with lots of really interesting volumes, and their contemporary counterparts, which are just as exciting, if very different. So I hope you like this tutorial. I'm going to quickly switch over so I can say bye-bye to everybody.